Hey guys, it's Jordan with your weekly Oakwood Student Ministry video. As always, I hope you're doing well. We're in week 3 of our series, Vibes, where we've been talking about moods, emotions, feelings, our vibes, the kind of moods that often take over, and how we keep that from happening. And this week, we're going to talk about a biggie, fear. We've all been afraid at various times of various things. As we grow up, we have different stages of life, different things we're afraid of, but the constant is we do have fear. We experience fear in one form or the other. Maybe it's a fear that's kept you from trying new things, a fear of failure, a fear of getting hurt. Maybe it's hurt out of friendships and relationships that keep you kind of emotionally and relationally reserved because of that pain. Maybe it's made you think things about yourself. You created this script in your head that convinces you things about you, things about your life, about your future, all because of fear. Now, fear itself, it's part of what makes us human. Let me explain. We have the ability as humans to not live just in the moment, just reactionary to the moment like animals do. We can think about, third person, kind of look at our lives, look at our situations, and think about the future, what might happen. And so we wonder what if, and because of that, it makes us afraid. Now, this is a really cool thing that we can do, by the way. It's kind of what has caused humanity to grow and develop and change and build cities and societies and countries, because we look forward beyond just the moment, what we're doing, and we create something. And this ability to look forward is also what led us to imagine things, to have hope, to dream. And these are all great things, but that ability is two-sided. For all the good things that we love, that we can do, imagine, dream, hope, there's the fear side, where we worry and wonder, is this all going to go bad? Is this going to fail? Am I going to get hurt somehow out of this? And so all those what ifs, they kind of drive us crazy. You go round and round and round and round, and your world becomes made up basically of those fears, of those what ifs. What was the last thing you were afraid of? Think about it. What's something you're afraid of right now? Something you're afraid of happening or not happening? How much of your day do you spend thinking about it, stressing over it, worrying about it? Is it your midterms, going to school with the pandemic, wondering if he or she likes you, is going to return your call, reject you? Whatever it is, it's the same idea, that fear. If you're anything like me, when one of those things hits you, it just captures my day. I spend so much of my day mulling over it, thinking through scenarios. What would I do? What should I say? That kind of stuff. And so the fear vibe takes over, and your world kind of shrinks down to that fear. Here's the good news. Jesus had a lot to say in the Bible about fear. As always, we go to our Bibles to try to get answers. We're going to do that in a minute. But I want to make one point. Often we look at the words of Jesus in the context of fear, and we kind of take them out of context. And we'll say things like Jesus said, quote, "Fear not." It's like, well, that's not exactly helpful. I know I shouldn't be afraid of things, all that. But thankfully, in context, it's a lot more helpful than just saying that. So we're going to look at a passage where Jesus is with his boys, the disciples, and he says, "Fear not." But when we unpack the context, that's going to make a lot more sense, and I think be a lot more helpful. Let's go to our Bibles and see it. So during Jesus' public ministry, he had 12 disciples that followed him around. He was their teacher, they were his students, and they were actually really, really close friends. And so at one point in Matthew chapter 10, he looks at them and he says this, "Guys, I'm going to send you out like sheep among wolves." And we think about the dynamic here of sheep and wolves. Wolves are the predators and sheep are the lunch, basically. Jesus says, "I'm going to let you loose with a bunch of predators, and ones you'd probably usually run away from, and it's not going to go great." He tells them in more detail. He says, a lot of you are going to be arrested. You're going to be beaten. He starts telling them this. Then to wrap it all up, he smiles and says, "Don't be afraid." Like, wait a minute, Jesus. You can't tell us that and expect us not to be afraid. But in context, this is part of a larger lesson Jesus keeps trying to teach these guys. And I think we would do well to learn this lesson. So before this conversation ever happened, Jesus took the boys, the disciples, on a little field trip. And this is all connected. He took them out on a boat in the middle of the Sea of Galilee. I mean, this is a big body of water. You could be in the middle and not see land anywhere. So they're in the middle of the sea. And what the Bible tells us about the Sea of Galilee is often it would get very rough. Tempestuous is the word. High waves, rain, wind blowing. And that's what happened here in Matthew chapter 8. Before this conversation about the wolves and the sheep ever happened, they're out on the boat. And it says, suddenly, in verse 24, a furious storm came up on the lake so that the waves swept over the boat. And they're not in a very large boat here. They're in the middle of the water, and without warning, this storm shows up. Just imagine being there. The waves flying, water coming over the boat. It's raining, the wind's blowing, you're rocking every which way. There's probably thunder and lightning. A scary place to be. Not really a leisure cruise. And what is Jesus doing in the middle of this moment? He's sleeping. So the disciples, they're freaked out. They're losing their minds. They're terrified of dying and drowning right now. And they run to find Jesus, and he's sleeping. They wake him up and they say, Lord, save us. We're going to drown. They were frustrated. They felt alone. They were scared. And they wanted their leader to help. And they find him sleeping. This is how Jesus responds. As they wake him up from his little cat nap, he says, quote, you of little faith, why are you so afraid? I can only imagine the disciples soaked with water, throwing up over the side of the bow, waves coming every which way, fish in the boat. And they're like, this, Jesus, this is why we're afraid. Jesus wasn't paying attention to them, though. Wasn't paying attention to what was right in front of them, what they were worried about. He had something else to teach them about fear. So check this out. I love this. Jesus gets up without panic, without, oh my gosh, look what's happening. Oh no, what are we going to do? None of that. He just stands up, and I think he stayed chill to make a point too, no matter how scary the circumstances. I love that Jesus stays calm. And Matthew says he spoke to the wind and the waves, and they calmed down. That's it. The disciples were amazed. They responded by saying, what kind of man is this? Even the winds and the waves obey him. And maybe the answer was he's what he says he is. He's God who created those winds and waves. And so they're freaked out. They're glad the waves have stopped. They're probably a little scared now of Jesus, but they also really realize something. Jesus, who calmly stood up and calmed the waves and the wind, he did it to take care of them. He had that power, but he used it to take care of them. So in that moment, their confidence in Jesus overwhelmed their fear of the situation, fear of the storm. And that was the point of the field trip. Jesus showed them that their feelings of fear don't have to control them. They don't have to boss them around. Why? Because there's somebody bigger. There's a bigger, badder dude on the block, and every time it's Jesus. And he's more capable than whatever it is they're afraid of. All right, so back to the conversation where Jesus says, hey, I'm going to send you out like sheep to the wolves. He says this to them, but don't be afraid of those who kill the body but cannot kill your soul. And you might be thinking, what does that mean? Jesus is looking at them saying, hey, you remember who's in charge here? Like the things you're afraid of, even if these guys do kill you, don't fear them. Fear the bigger, badder dude on the block. That's me, Jesus says. They can kill your body. I'm the one in charge of your soul. If you're going to fear anybody, if you're going to listen to anybody, if you're going to let anybody be the boss of you, don't let it be fear, don't let it be them. Make sure it's me. If you're going to be afraid of something, be afraid of something worth being afraid of. And then he says, I don't care what situation you're in, whether it's the storm and the waves, I'm bigger and badder than that. Whether it's those guys, I'm bigger, I'm badder than that. It's like he was saying, remember the boat ride? Well, who was in charge there? Remember all the situations we've been in? Who's been in charge there? So he goes on, he says, are not 2 sparrows sold for a penny? Yet not one of them will fall to the ground outside your Father's care. And even the hairs of your head are all numbered, he says. So don't be afraid. You're worth far more than more sparrows. I love this. He's not just saying I'm bigger and badder. He says, but I also care about you. I love you. He says, God pays attention to you. Don't be afraid. You're worth more than sparrows. Don't be afraid. God knows the intimate details of your life. He knows how many hairs you have on your head. Don't be afraid. You're valuable to him. God cares. He knows the situation you're in. He knows the details of it. He knows what you're up against, and he cares about you. So when it comes to dealing with fear, this is a big deal. Because God knows all about it and is in the middle of it with you, that changes the dynamic in a lot of ways, if you believe that. But Jesus wasn't done. He had something else he wanted to teach them. So he takes them on another field trip, and we call this the feeding of the thousands. So Jesus is preaching all day. It's getting late. People are getting tired. This is like a rock concert. The average town was 60 to 100 people. We have thousands of people gathered to hear Jesus speak. And so when it gets late, it's like, well, they can't all hang out here. We got to send them home. We don't have any food for them. It's going to get, pretty crazy here. People start going in a frenzy in any way. So the disciples say, let's send everybody home, Jesus. It's getting late. Jesus says, no, we can feed them. And the disciples start freaking out again. How are we going to do this? This is impossible. How can we possibly feed everyone? Jesus says, get an inventory, gets a kid's lunch, takes his Lunchable. Jesus, breaks into a bunch of baskets, give them to him. And there's just more and more than enough to go around. It's a miracle. It's a big deal. It's a miracle. But before they have time to stay and enjoy it, this is the cool part, in context of what happens. Jesus tells the disciples, all right, boys, get back in the boat. And they're probably thinking, are you kidding me? Too soon, Jesus. We just got off the boat. I'm not going back. I don't want another lesson out on the waves with you, Jesus. He says, no. Get in the boat. So they all get in. Plot twist. Jesus stays on the shore and maybe pushed them off and says, see you on the other side, gentlemen. And they're like, are you kidding me? So not only do we have to get back in the boat on the water, you're not even coming with us this time. He says, I'll see you on the other side. So the disciples spent all night rowing. They want to get across. They want to get off this boat, off this sea as quick as they can. But at some point in the night, the wind starts blowing, the waves start getting bigger, and they have to be thinking, great, he sent us out here to die. He's not with us this time. I wish he was sleeping in the boat so we could wake him up and get some help here. But then they look out in the water and they see something they can't believe. Out there, just imagine the scene. There's Jesus walking across the water. Matthew says the disciples were terrified. They thought they saw a ghost, some of them. And then Jesus gets their attention by saying something they've heard before. He says, take courage, gentlemen. It is I. Don't be afraid. I think he just keeps trying to remind them of this simple lesson. All these field trips, all the lessons up to this point, they saw miracles, they heard teachings, and he's just saying, don't let fear control you. I'm here. I'm bigger than that. Well, unfortunately, fear does rule them for a lot of the remainder of the story. Up until the end of Jesus' life, actually, they let fear control them. Fast forward to the night Jesus was arrested. The disciples abandoned him. Why? Because they thought, we're going to get arrested too. When they beat Jesus, they ran away because they thought they could beat. When they crucified Jesus, they were nowhere to be seen. A few of them snuck around, but they didn't want to publicly be known that they were there. And then when Jesus was buried, where were the disciples? They're hiding in a room because they're afraid of what might happen to them. But then Sunday comes. Some of the women who follow Jesus, they go to the tomb, they find it's empty. They run to the disciples and they say, hey, guys, the tomb's empty. So the disciples run to the tomb. They think somebody stole the body. And then it happens. Jesus shows up to them. He says, hi, guys, I'm back. And just what do you think went through their minds at this point? When the guy you've been following dies and then shows up again, when he keeps saying, hey, I'm God, don't worry about it, this is part of the plan, I'm going to die, but I'm going to rise, I'm going to come back, don't worry about death, I've got it covered. Like, when he says all that, I have to imagine when he comes back, you see him face to face, everything he says starts to be more real and have more meaning to it, be more true, more believable. Suddenly, all the times he said, don't be afraid, they made a lot more sense. He could conquer death itself. He could conquer the devil himself. So maybe we shouldn't be as afraid of this stuff. Maybe he's the one we should be looking to. See, for the disciples who loved and followed Jesus, the resurrection wasn't just a nice surprise. This was everything. It made them bold. It gave them strength. It put everything about fear into a proper perspective. The world was still crazy around them, but because of Jesus, because of the resurrection of Jesus, For the disciples and anybody who follows Jesus today, you can put fear in its place. And I think these guys at this point finally understood the lesson from the book. Here it is. When all the things around you seem so much bigger and scarier than you can handle, Jesus says, fear not. I'm with you. I'm bigger than your fear, and I'm with you. And we know this is true of the disciples. Why? Because after the resurrection, these guys became bold like lions. They didn't run away and hide from officials. They got up toe-to-toe with them and told them about Jesus. And they weren't afraid. They said, okay, you can kill me. We can't stop telling you what we know to be true. He's God. He's the biggest, baddest dude on the block. So yeah, I'm afraid of what you might do to me, but I'm more afraid of him, and I'm more worried about him than I ever will be of you, kitty cat. So we're going to follow Jesus. And this is how they lived their lives. Many of them to their last words as they were martyred and killed. And they boldly followed Jesus. Doesn't mean consequences don't happen, but they didn't let fear rule them. So if you're up against fear, here's the lesson. Jesus is bigger than your fear. They started to live as though they believed what Jesus told them. That he's bigger than it, he's bigger than even death, and he is with them. Not because there was nothing to be afraid of, that's not why they did it, but because God was clearly bigger than their biggest fears. So in closing, like I said, fear is just part of our experience as humans. We can look in the future and ask, what if, and we kind of freak out. But we don't have to live like fear is in charge of us. It doesn't have to take control. One last story I want to tell you. There's a guy named Peter. He was one of Jesus' disciples. He was the loudmouth of the group. And he was there for all the healings, the miracles, the teachings, Jesus' death, burial, resurrection. Peter was there for it all. And he made a bunch of promises to Jesus he didn't keep. He said, I'll never deny knowing you, Jesus, and he does it 3 times, as Jesus said he would. He said he'd stay focused on what Jesus told him was going to happen. Then he panicked the night Jesus was arrested. He'd say he'd always be there for Jesus, but then he hid in fear the night Jesus died, or the morning Jesus died. Yet that guy, Peter, because of the resurrection for him, everything changed. Fear no longer controlled him, and he became one of the boldest advocates for Jesus in the early church. So he wrote some things down. He gave some tips to future Christians, us, about fear in Jesus. And he said this in 1 Peter 5:7, cast all your anxiety on him because he cares for you. To cast means to throw, to hurl, to heave. This is a very active and intentional word. You don't do it by accident. And Peter's saying, listen, I was there. I went through it. Trust me. And Peter died a martyr. He says, when you feel anxiety, when you feel fear, worry, when it starts to take over, throw it to Jesus. Why? Because he loves you. Because he cares for you. Because he can handle it even when you can't. Follow him. Trust him. So put it this way, because of Jesus, fear doesn't have to be the boss of you. So what do I want you to do? Well, I found this to be helpful. Number one, when you're afraid, name it. Name what you're afraid of. Right? Sometimes there's these ethereal ideas and it runs all over and you keep running down different what-if scenarios. Just name it. It might be helpful just to write it down and to clearly say, okay, this is what I'm afraid of. I'm afraid of this. I'm afraid if this happens, this will happen. Just write it down. Real simple. So you can kind of see what you're dealing with rather than chasing an idea. So 1, name it and write it down. 2, throw that fear to Jesus. Whether in prayer or write it down and say, Jesus, I'm trusting you. Help me to trust you. Help me to give this to you. This is beyond my control. Help me to believe that you're there, that you care, that you're bigger than this, and that no matter what happens, because of you, I'll be okay. Like, so much of Jesus' ministry was giving us a proper perspective. Like when he says, don't fear death, don't fear the ones who kill your body, worry about your soul. He says, because if you do, it wasn't just like a threat or Jesus being mean. If you do that, he says, you'll enjoy eternity in paradise. Who cares about what happens in the short term here? If you do the right thing here, if you follow me, you'll be in heaven. You don't earn salvation. That's not what I'm saying. He says, live with integrity now. Follow Jesus, accept my grace, and no matter how this plays out, it's not going to be a big deal in the long run, guys. That's so much of what Jesus taught us. Okay, write it down. All right. Name it, write it down. 2, give it to Jesus. 3, don't carry it alone. The reason we have the church is to help each other carry our burdens. And so talk to me, your leaders, your parents, a trusted friend. Share what you're afraid of. Help us pray with you about it, pray for you, pray that you'd have confidence to trust Jesus, that you'd walk boldly, following him. Don't do it alone. I'm telling you, that's how this goes down. If you can do those 3 things, you have a good shot of keeping fear from overwhelming and controlling you. I hope you remember, I'm not saying these vibes, these feelings, emotions are all bad and don't have their place, but when they control us, that's when it gets destructive. So we can learn from emotions, but we need to know that because of Jesus, they don't have to be the boss of you. So you head to group online if you are. Talk to your leaders if you want to, but either way, reach out. If not, I hope you'll talk to somebody about your fears so we can walk with you. As always, I love you. I hope you're doing well. We're going to finish this series next week, and I hope to see you soon. All right, bye.